Part 4. He opened the name list in the throne room, and as expected, the space which should have contained Shaltier's name was blank. This verified that Shaltier was dead, and so phase 1 of the plan was concluded. Ains's heart ached. While he knew that there was no other way, the fact that he had personally committed and witnessed the act filled him with guilt. In his heart, Ains apologized to Shaltier. Then he gulped, and turned to the gathered guardians. Then, the next step will be to resurrect Shaltier. Albedo, pay attention to Shaltier's name. If she remains mind-controlled as before. Ains-sama, though I may overstep myself, I propose that you should allow us to deal with it ourselves. Cositus and Aura immediately agreed with Demiurge's words, while Med despondently agreed as well. Only Albedo remained unmoved. Demiurge's passionate words interrupted Ains's mumbling. We are fully aware that your orders are to be respected above all else, Ains-sama. We will grind ourselves to dust in order to obey them. However, as your loyal servants, we cannot allow you to be placed into danger once more, Ains-sama. Demiurge's gaze shifted from Ains to Albedo. If Shaltier betrays you once more, then we shall eliminate her as your guardians. We pray that you will watch us do so, Ains-sama. Now that he understood the guardian's intentions, Ains could not offer any further resistance. I understand. Guardians, if Shaltier betrays us once more, you may deal with her as you see fit. The guardians nodded in acknowledgement. Ains felt miserable as he watched them. What a pathetic excuse for a master he was. Even after going this far, he still had to let his beloved children kill each other. The root cause of it all was his foolishness. It was all his fault. Ains wanted to sigh, but as he saw the gentle expression on Albedo's face as she stood to the side, he decided to swallow it. Ains-sama, all you need to do is stand aside and watch. To whom should we pledge our loyalty if the final supreme being vanishes? Though we will not have been abandoned, we will still be lonely if all the supreme beings are gone. Indeed, it's very lonely to not have anyone by your side. Ains's eyes had unconsciously turned to the flags hanging within the throne room, his gaze resting on the emblems above his head. Yes, you're right. It must have been that way in the treasury too. What a fool I was. After muttering to himself, Ains turned to face the guardians. Protect me, guardians. It begins now. Their spirited replies washed over Ains as he grabbed the staff of Azulgan that floated in the air beside him, and turned it toward a corner of the throne room. There was a mountain of gold coins there, about 500 million of them. That was the sum needed to recall Shaltier to life. Normally, he would have need to use the keyboard to perform the necessary operations, but he now knew that it was no longer necessary. The mountain of gold changed shape, from a solid to a liquid. Watched by the guardians, the molten gold formed a river, which flowed to the same place. 10,000 tons of gold compacted and shrank, taking a humanoid shape that finally resolved itself into the form of a golden puppet, and its golden glow slowly weakened. Soon, the golden glow had vanished completely, leaving white, waxy skin and platinum blonde hair. There was no doubt that the person before him was Shaltier Bloodvatlen. Albedo. Ains kept his eyes fixed on Shaltier as he bellowed Albedo's name. Please be at ease. It seems the mind control has been terminated. Is that so? Ains unconsciously touched his chest in response to the powerful sense of relief flooding him. The gesture calmed his spirit. Then, he reached into his pocket dimension and retrieved a black cloak, before he strode over to the supine Shaltier. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her chest was not moving. She lay quietly on the ground, like a corpse. Still, the undead were essentially animated corpses, so that was hardly unusual. Something unusual. The chest he had just seen was so flat that it hardly seemed to belong to a girl, but to a boy. Not knowing where to put his eyes, Ains's gaze left her chest and looked elsewhere. The freshly resurrected Shaltier was naked, of course, so he had no idea where he should be looking. Ains was so panicked that he forgot that all he had to do was look elsewhere. His vision had sharpened greatly from when he was a human being, so he could see certain places very clearly. Shaltier's body was carelessly displayed, and her thighs were slightly parted. Ains hurriedly threw the black cape over her. The cape spread in mid-air, settling perfectly on Shaltier and covering her entire body. It's not like I regret doing that. I'm undead, so I have no sexual desires. No, that should be, almost no sexual desires. I was looking at Shaltier's body because I was simply curious about whether or not she was designed with parts under her clothing. You'd never be able to take off all your clothes in YGGDRASIL anyway, so that's why I took a peek. That's right, it's not because I was wondering if she had hair down there or anything. As Ains tried to explain his actions to someone, he approached Shaltier, feeling somewhat helpless. Perhaps the reason why he took so long to reach her was because he wanted to cool down his overheating head. Also, he deliberately ignored the female voice behind him saying, "If you're interested, I have no objection to displaying myself for your viewing pleasure." As Ains stood before her, Shaltier's crimson eyes opened, as though sensing the presence of someone nearby. She blinked sleepily and looked around, finally resting her gaze on Ains. "Ains-sama." She sounded like she was groggy from having just woken up. However, he could hear the loyalty in her voice. Although Albedo and Nazarik's administration system had already verified her allegiance, Ains was delighted to confirm it with his own ears, and he knelt down to embrace Shaltier. Yui. It was hard to believe that such a slender body possessed such startling physical abilities. Ains paid no heed to Shaltier, who was babbling in a thoroughly baffled way, and tightened his grip on her. "Wonderful. No, I'm sorry. This was all my fault. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm certain that you couldn't have made a mistake, Ains-sama." Shaltier's ice-cold hands returned the embrace. They were vaguely uncomfortable, given that she seemed to be trying to grope him, but Ains did not stop her, because she was probably trying to verify her sense of touch after her resurrection. He pretended that he did not hear her saying, "Shall I have my first time here?" However, Albedo immediately made her displeasure known. "Ains-sama, I believe Shaltier is tired, so we should leave her be for now." Indeed. Perhaps there was a penalty for resurrecting NPCs, just as there was for players. After all, this was the first resurrection ever since coming to this world. Tell me the details later. Before that, I have some questions. After Ains let go of Shaltier, a look of disappointment crossed Shaltier's face and she glared sharply at Albedo. Albedo responded with her usual smile. He thought they would continue staring at each other as usual, but Shaltier averted her eyes instead. "Yes, do ask me whatever you desire." "Right, Ains-sama, why I'm in the throne room. Then, there's the matter of my body, and your treatment of me, Ains-sama. Have I caused any trouble?" "I was about to ask you that. Do you remember anything that happened?" Yes. Sorry. Shaltier, tell me the last thing you remember." Shaltier's most recent memory was 5 days ago. She had no impression of what had happened after that, until now. Ains could have used the 10th tier spell, Control Amnesia, like he had at Kani Village, but even altering short stretches of memory would require a massive amount of MP. The staggering amount of MP need to affect 5 days' worth of memories was beyond the limit of ordinary magic casters. Not even Ains and his extraordinary MP regeneration rates could do it. Of course, the resurrection process might be such that NPCs lost their memories of the past few days. Alternately, perhaps several people might have gathered to do it. He lacked information at the present moment, so he could not solve that mystery. Still, he could be sure that whoever had used the world-class item on Shaltier had gone silent, vanishing without a trace. It's quite troublesome when I don't know who's acting behind the scenes. The enemy might be waiting for a chance to strike at Nazarick. No, perhaps I should be glad that this incident didn't escalate. In any case, I'll make sure I thoroughly avenge myself on whoever did this to Nazarick. Ains quelled the anger which even his undead traits could not fully suppress, and gently asked Shaltier, "Are there any other problems with your body? If this world was like YGGDRASIL, then there should not have been anything else. The NPCs should not have lost levels," but he was unsure if the same applied to this world as well. For all he knew, the NPCs would lose levels just like player characters would. Shaltier felt herself up before answering Ains. "I don't think there's anything." "Is that so?" After Shaltier answered, a look of shock came over her face. Not knowing what was wrong, Ains felt uneasiness welling up inside him. "Ains-sama, what happened? What's wrong? My chest is gone." The faces of the Guardians twisted as they heard this, with expressions of "we want our concern back" written all over them. Even Demiurge had his teeth bared. "Don't you know what you did? How could you say something like that?" As Albedo delivered a rebuke on everyone's behalf, Shaltier's shoulders trembled in fright. Ains had gone so limp that his hands were about to drag on the floor. All he could do was watch Shaltier argue with the other Guardians, and ponder various questions about resurrection. In particularly, he hoped that Clementine and Khazit, who he had met in the graveyard, would also lose their memories after resurrection, as Shaltier had. Still, that was just being optimistic. Since he did not know why Shaltier had lost her memories, he could not guarantee that their resurrection through magic would be the same as resurrecting an NPC through money. Just as Ains was thinking about these things, Shaltier had already begun tearing up under Albedo's one-sided torrent of abuse. As Ains watched the scene before him, he recalled a scene from the past. He saw Bukabuka Chigama, the elder sister, scolding Peroncino, her younger brother, and the rest of his smiling guildmates. The NPCs before him were like his past comrades. Ains slowly reached a hand out, and then stopped in mid-air. It felt as though an invisible wall of glass was blocking him. A profound sense of loneliness filled Ains's heart. It felt as though the memories of the warm place where the Guardians existed was little more than an image on a monitor, and he was on the other side. If he stepped into it, they would pledge their loyalty to him. That was a form of awe, and not the warmth he had felt when he had been with his friends. He felt that it was a terrible shame. Just as Ains's hand fell powerlessly, Albedo turned around as though sensing something strange about Ains and watched him quietly. Baffled by why she was looking at him that way, Ains was about to ask what was wrong when the flames in his eyes suddenly flared up. That was because Albedo was gently holding her hand out to him. After a moment's hesitation, Ains took her hand, and thus he was pulled into the circle of the Guardians. Albedo was the first to speak, and then the other Guardians followed suit. "Ains-sama, please reprimand Shaltier sternly." "That's right. Please give this dummy a good scolding." "Indeed. She needs stern lesson. You'll remember Ains-sama's words of wisdom, won't you? Although, maybe it would be better not to be too strict." Ha. Ains could not keep his laughter from escaping his mouth despite the baffled looks from the Guardians around him. No, that laughter did not just come from his mouth but from his heart. After he was satisfied, Ains silently turned back to Shaltia. I have told Albedo before, but the fault for this does not lie with you, Shaltia. It is I who possessed all this information but did not consider the possibility of this happening. Who most deserves to be rebuked for this? Shaltia, you did nothing wrong. Remember that. Thank you, Ains-sama. Demiurge, you will be in charge of explain what happened to Shaltia. Can you do that? Demiurge bowed to show that he understood. Then there's the matter of Sebas. He will be bait. As Ains calmly proposed using one of his subordinates as bait, the Guardians merely nodded, with the attitude a proper minion should have. They were simply prioritizing the considerations of the master of the great underground tomb of Nazarick over the life of their colleague. I am not entirely willing to do this, but it cannot be helped. I do not know why Shaltia was targeted, but if the opposition is looking for a new victim, they might well decide on Sebas, who was traveling with her. This was why I did not call him back to receive a world-class item. Albedo, select a few clandestine operatives to keep an eye on Sebas and his surroundings. He might be bait, but I do not intend to allow Sebas to be so easily taken. Inform these observers that their mission also includes preventing the enemy from approaching Sebas. After issuing his orders, Ains narrowed his eyes. In other words, the flames in his eye sockets grew dim. Someday I shall meet the person who used a world-class item on Shaltia. When that day comes, I shall return the favor with interest. Understood. I will select the appropriate personnel as soon as possible. Please do. Thanks to Shaltia, we now know that NPCs can be resurrected, but I do not wish to kill any of the NPCs my friends created again. Moved by those words, the Guardians lowered their heads. They had probably sensed how much Ains valued them. However, since he had actually voiced those feelings, the effect on him had been that much greater. Shaltia seemed to have realized something had happened to her. A look of shock crossed her face, which soon turned into one of utmost regret. Ains gestured that she did not need to take it to heart. Just then, a voice came from the side. Then, Ains-sama. What is it, Mayor? Should I remove all traces of the battle? There's no need for that. Did you know? When one breaks a spell-sealing crystal, it releases powerful energy, enough to level the surroundings. Is that so? My apologies. It's a lie, of course. What is false is true and what is true is false. Magic sealing crystals seem to be rare items, so nobody should be able to test that. Albedo put a few scratches on the item Negan was using. Then, we'll need to have the blacksmith build some damaged armor and put some scorch marks on it, so it looks like it went through an intense battle. Understood. In addition, perhaps I have been too careless so far, which allowed hidden enemies around Nazarick to harm us. Thus, I wish to initiate a program to strengthen Nazarick. Part of that is to use my skills to create an undead army. I think I've mentioned that before. Did I only tell Albedo about that? Forget that. In any case, this will be my top priority. I would like to make some preparations to recover corpses from Erantal which can be used to make an undead army. About that, Ains-sama. What's wrong, Albedo? If I am not wrong, when you use a human corpse as a medium for making undead, the undead thus created are quite weak, despite being mid-tier. Is that correct? Indeed. Is there a problem? The most powerful undead he could make with the corpses of the Sunlight Scripture were level 40. Beyond that, the undead would vanish with the passage of time, along with the corpses that served as their medium. In truth, after receiving that order, I had considered ways of obtaining fresh corpses. Perhaps you could consider using non-human corpses. I trust you do not intend to use the corpses of Nazarick's vassals. No, that is absolutely not my intention. I was thinking of using other demi-humans. Albedo smiled. It was a stunningly beautiful and terribly cruel smile. Aura discovered a lizardman village. What do you think of attacking and destroying them? End chapter.